Hello, everyone. Wishing you a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Want to thank you as well for joining me in this weekly discussion focusing on the book Jesus in Our Days. We're here today discussing the 13th chapter of the book, which is talk about Jesus and revolution. Yes, I love the title. So, just before we go in, as usual, I like to remind all of us about how this book, which is part of a psychological series of 16 books written by spiritual author Joanna de Angelis, is such a powerful and impactful book. And so I'm here inviting you to take a moment to read it. I am so happy, so honored to be here to present some of the ideas found in this book. And again, the intent of the series of live talks is to discuss those messages and how insightful they are in this very first book of the series. It is a small book. Each chapter, they range from 2 to 3 up to 4 pages. In this case, we have a 4 pager chapter, and they bring this amazing plethora, this amazing breadth of different perspective about who Jesus was and how can we learn from understanding him in a more broader view. But as we dive into Jesus' teaching, they just impact me, they touch me, and because of it, I'm really pleased to be here with you to discuss them. So let's go on to, as we are so close to the end of the book, let's move on to the actual content of today's discussion. So here we talked about Jesus. Jesus acted as a deep, a profound psychologist. So we're going to look into, on one hand, this revolutionary aspect of Jesus, and they're amazing. On the other hand, how he did that through a psychotherapist persona. So let's think about it, right? We often are good with portraying our outward appearance, right? And yet, whenever we speak to anyone, including a paid professional, health professional, when we go on to talk about how we feel, how we're not well, or how we are, our sentiments, for Jesus, those outward appearances were really not important at all. He needed to go beyond this facade. And so, from that perspective, we come to this notion of a need for transparency in how Jesus himself was able to look through our masks. So, again, when we are ready, if we're ready, but when we are ready to open up, to talk about, yes, something is not going on so easy for me. Let me just talk about it. And there is all this many multiple emotions that we may feel. Interesting thing, no matter what, we invariably use filters. So the words that we choose and how we use them hide what would should really be able to say about all that we're going through. And we hide from ourselves, we hide from our family, from our social network, if you will, and sometimes we also hide from our therapist. But the question here is, why is it so hard to be transparent, right? And the answer is simple. We just have this unconscious dread, this resistance that is not clear to our conscious mind of laying ourselves bare, to be naked to anyone, including to ourselves, right? So that's this fear, this dread, this resistance to be that vulnerable. And on the other hand, those who listen to us bearing, becoming naked toward them, they really don't know how to listen, and they don't know how to look at you and your vulnerabilities, and they are really often unable to understand. So I just wanted to say here that I've discussed this before, so forgive me if you were in the episode when we talked about it, but there is this tool called the Johari's window, and it is a model used to help you and me better understand our relationships with ourselves and with others. It is a simple framework, and it unveils through, it's just quite interesting, unveiling how we hide ourselves, knowingly or not. We start to better understand conscious and unconscious bias that are between us and the other, right? So, understanding and learning this framework may help increase our ability to be self aware, as well as the ability to understand others. So, again, about the Johari's window, it is very simple, very useful, and it brings us this ability to understand and become more self-aware, and it helps also in a group situation because it starts to highlight those difficulties that we have in reaching um, this knowledge, this self-knowledge, this inner awareness, and it represents what we know, what we don't know about ourselves. And according to the tool, we have basically four personas, and no, they're not 25% each. They're variously different, but basically, if you look many times, if you research it, if you Google for it, you will see four quadrants, right? So a model with Y and X axis where each one will have at 25% the public persona, the hidden self, the blind spot, and the masked one, the unknown one. I'm sorry. So known and unknown, who we are, and the blind spot and those masks, which means I know who I am, but I don't want you to know who I am. So, what I learned about using the Johari's window is that it takes courage to open up, and it takes respect, tolerance, it takes patience, it takes learning to listen, to respect to those that are opening up to us. Yet, usually, we really know that those that are closest to us may use our most vulnerable moments against us when they're angry at us, when they're not easy to go through. So when I looked at that, leveraging a moment of vulnerability to go against the other as a type of violence. But it's also important for us to know that for those who listen to us, right, regardless of doing this intentionally or not, the act of listening is an act in which inherently, without knowing, we have our own projections into what I listen to the other. So I am opening up. It's very difficult. I'm trying to not get anyone to know this deep dark secret that I bring. Just kidding here, but this is an area of vulnerability, and I'm bringing to you, and you unknowingly will project what you have in you into what you hear from you. So it is a process in which you, the listener, and I'm just joking here, but if you were to listen to me opening up to you, you will listen and you will unintentionally, by the way, but you will adapt the information to your own understanding, and you will, again, unintentionally attach meaning based on your own areas of conflict. Those are your projections. So it's a hard thing to be able to open up, to be listened to. But it's good to hear, and I have in the slide, and I'm just going to read to you, as the perfect man, Jesus, clear in his effective transparency, penetrated people's deepest unconscious mysteries with which they struggled on the surface of effects without going back to the causes. So, how did he do this? And he did this beautifully, right? His dialogues were that we get, but they're short but to the point. He did not go all around to talk about it, or using subterfuge to get to a point. And he did that even when he used things like, those are really great techniques, but when he used, for instance, parables, or in many cases, what comes to us about some of Jesus's teaching is the fact that instead of answering a question, he posed a question to a question, right? So he he used really great techniques to get to the truth and to get to anyone to reveal themselves in their own words. So start to think about, if I'm opening up and I'm struggling to open up, if you, the listener, is Jesus, Jesus pointedly knows all about me and helps me with my own words reveal who I am to myself and to him. And he did this, and he did this over and over again, repeatedly so, and he used this, according to the text, with priests, right? Who asked him, for example, who is your neighbor? And right, the passage goes into listening to that, to this question. Jesus gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, and he led that person who asked this question to a very thoughtful, logic reasonable conclusion, even though not the most apparent conclusion. Likewise, he used the same method to those who asked him, for example, I don't know if you remember, but they asked if it was lawful to pay taxes to that the Roman Empire, right? So the Jews at the time would have to pay taxes, as many of other in history, other nations had to pay taxes to those that colonized them. And so they didn't ask, is it lawful? And Jesus just looked at the coin and asked, who's engraved in that coin? And it was Caesar. So give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, right? So from that perspective, he was a revolutionary. He was able to bring revolutionary truths that at the time was even more difficult to accept than today. But even today, we do so. How did he do that? Well, there is an article where Dave Burchett write, and he also wrote in When Bad Christians Happen to Good People. It's really cute, but he did go on and on talking about Jesus as this total revolutionary. And he lists how so. So Jesus, granted status to women at a time in a culture that did not exist. Um, his views, as we know, were quite upsetting to anyone in power. And if you think in terms of 2000 years ago, in historically speaking, women were viewed as property. And as a property, divorce was a no fault only for the husband. And also terrible as it may be, infanticide of baby girls because of what it meant to be a father mother of a girl was just really common in those cultures at the time. So also Jesus was a revolutionary because he completely rejected, and that's to me the most amazing revolutionary aspect of what Jesus brought to us, but his total rejection of repeating the law of the time, that the sense of justice was the eye for an eye, right? Or you punish your enemy. Those are the focus of those the system of justice at the time. And finally, and this is Burchett brings in that when bad Christians happen to good people, he mentions that Jesus rejected religiosity based on rules. And instead, he was a champion for the idea that you and me and everybody else are redeemable, right? We may be at fault and guilty, but we can redeem ourselves. But as I come to the conclusion, right, of this idea of revolution, what did really make Jesus so radical, right? And I bring to us the idea here that he, like no one ever until then, brought an immense sense of mercy and compassion. And perhaps the most indeed radical, revolutionary statement that he did was, be compassionate as your Father God is compassionate. And he did not say, right, we know him by saying, love your neighbors, but he brought an unequaled in its revolutionary sense the idea that we must love our enemies. So, how do we want to be radical like Jesus? Well, he said, even looking at a woman lustfully is a form of adultery. Remember when he said that? It's not just acting, but thinking about it. He did that when he asked that rich man that wanted to follow him, give it all up and you're ready to follow me. Or telling, I don't know, kings, generals, landowners, anyone with power, money, or prestige, they are not the greatest. Do you remember that? But he brought out that the least of all among us, that person is the greatest. So it's interesting if you think about all of those messages of revolutionary power. We think real quickly and we think to ourselves, who are the most powerful? Those that somehow are revered, almost worshipped. Well, athletes, entertainers, influencers, and we see their behaviors because it's really very much in our face through social media, that there is pride in everything they say or show themselves. And Jesus would say the following: seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added into you. This is Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. But what he's saying here is that against all of our adopted and popular thinking, the the most revolutionary statement that we can ever listen to, they're all about define that status quo. That's the revolutionary aspect of Jesus. And so one is to just think about it, how transparent he was and how he was revolutionary in his transparency by not accepting what is in the filter, the veil of this is what society and culture, a ephemeral point, right? That's the point in time in history that will be gone through as we move on in time, and he could see through it. This is just not a temporal enough. So if we keep thinking about it, and this is this is as I'm getting to the end of our discussion today, let's think about this idea of a new vision, right, that he brought forth. And Joanna tells us that it was how Jesus really dealt with those who were in pain, those who were suffering. And I mean, this is the entire humankind. If you think about it, the entire humanity is going through some sort of pain. I have my pain points, I have my sufferings, and just about everybody that I look around, no matter how much they're trying, they have something they're going through. And let's think about, so Jesus met anyone who was suffering, and he utilized his psychotherapy, and he did that masterfully. And yes, Joanna, what do you mean by that? And it's just think in terms of psychotherapy. Let's think about what is psychotherapy, right? And how do we say that Jesus employed the best way ever known until then? So break it down. Psychotherapy, sometimes called talk therapy, refers to a variety of treatments with the goal to help me, the patient, right, identify and address and often change what are my emotional upheaval, my thoughts, my behaviors. So that's what my therapy is. And most psychotherapy today's age, right? It takes place with a professional, healthcare professional in the mental health field, and a patient meeting one on one or in a group setting. But this is how it is done today. Jesus, when he met those who were suffering, never really had to probe, what do you want? What are your dreams? Yet he knew right there, he was able to see through their conscious and unconscious minds, their archives, their psychological shadows. And by accessing those archives, let me just stop. Let me just stop. By accessing those, let's go back to, but what are those, right? For those of us who are not in the field of psychology, psychotherapy, let's just define a little bit. Unconscious is simply the part of our minds that are inaccessible to my conscious mind, but regardless of being accessible or not, they will impact my behavior and my emotions, therefore my emotional well-being. And the unconscious mind are contain processes that occur automatically and not available for my own introspection. So it's important for us to understand that although these processes exist, beneath the surface, if you think in terms of a line, and on top of the line is what's available and conscious. Remember the Johari windows? It's my open, my public persona, if you will. It's open. I know, and you know who I am. But below that, the unconscious mind, there are all those processes beneath it that they're they're there and they exert an impact, an effect on my conscious. So there is an interrelationship because my thought processes, my behaviors are impacted by what I don't know, this part that is hidden. And the other part that Joanna talks about regarding Jesus is that he could access, in so many words, their psychological shadows, right? So shadow, what is a psychological shadow? The personal shadow is often called as the disowned self, and it simply means that it's a representation of the parts of us that we don't want to claim or associate with ourselves. And they may even include some positive qualities, but for whatever reason, be it potentially the cultural setting, the education, or whatever, you really repress that side of who we are. And in Jungian psychology, shadow work involves the assistance of working with a psychoanalyst, and that person will guide the patient through what they call the shadow self. And shadow work is a method that was created, originated from the work of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychotherapist. And in this process, you start, the end goal is to unveil your shadow and integrate those things that you yourself trashed, if you will, disowned, if you will, all of those parts of our personality that we don't want, that and we repress and we forget, we not forget, but we unconsciously go through this process of repression. So Jung brings this framework, but one of the things that I'd like to bring here is that it is a psychological but a spiritual process. So back to Jesus. Jesus, mm, no need for any methodology, no psychoanalysis, no shadow work. He did not require a journey with each of those who came upon him to access their unconscious mind, right? So he did not do this for the unconscious mind. He did not do this for the repressed self. And he was able to unveil and really help healing. And with the healing is what Joanna calls, right? Bring the alignment back between the ego, personality, and the self, the spirit. So it's very interesting because if you think in terms of Jesus as this psychotherapist, a revolutionary psychotherapist, he did not need to prescribe medications. He did not look for root causes outside of you, which means no blaming, no outsourcing the blame to, I don't know, family, your socioeconomic environment, so on and so forth. And he did not have to look into how you somatize, how you express those pain and sufferings as an accusation to you, the patient. You are doing this to yourself. Instead, how did he do it? He just loved each and every person that came to him. He offered safety. He helped them rediscover their own latent abandoned abilities. And he awakened, I put that in the slide that you can read. He awakened in each one of those who came upon him, those patients, a new vision of life and supported them at the moment. And he did not keep them from continue as they desired. So free will is still part of the equation. If I am going through this, and he would say, remember, go and sin no more. But it's your option to continue to how you're living or not, because he never imposed himself on anyone. And those who went after him, who sought him, they, right, they needed they needed him, they needed his love, and he never ever imposed or judged, simply loved. So I wanted to bring upon another aspect of this chapter, which is the idea of the death of the old man. And it's really a term that we see a lot when we start to discuss inner transformation, or even the responsibilities that we need to take on. But where do we find the term? We find that in Paul. So Romans 6, chapter 6, verse 6, the Apostle Paul wrote that our old man, right, was crucified with Jesus. And so if we pause to try to understand that, we can see, what did Paul mean by that? Our old man was crucified with Jesus. And we can even think, was he just in a morbid frame of mind? Was he even masochist? Or was Paul teaching something really important, this very spiritual lesson for all of us? And he brings it again in Romans 6:23, where he talks about the wages of sin is death. What did he mean? Well, Paul was bringing the idea that our wages, or in other words, what we produce, what we earn, when we sin, again, what is to sin is to not follow, to have a transgression under God's laws, our divine laws that it is inside of us through our conscience, right? When we do this, it will lead us to death. But what we want to unpack here is the fact that Paul knew that about him, and he repented and he was forgiven, right? Yet, Paul, after his conversion, he battled with himself until his death. And when he brings the idea to put to death the old man, right? And this is, we see that in his letter to the Ephesians. And he says, right, the old man, you have not so learned Christ, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man, which grows corrupt according to deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. It's beautiful. This is chapter 4 of Ephesians. And he was just telling in that go on and put away your old man. And what is the old man? Well, the selfish man, the sinful man, and all the things that we really naturally think and behave in the world that we live because of our cultural context, the things that we take for granted until we stop to think about it, right? Let's remember what we just said previously. Jesus was revolutionary because even though you could stone baby girls and you could stone adulterous women, was it right to do so? Right. So he did that. He invited us to kill, metaphorically speaking, our old selves and welcome the new person. But let us not forget that even decades after his conversion, he, Paul, was fighting that battle, right? And he was fighting the impulses and overcoming his humanity, his sinfulness, meaning his imperfections. And Paul realized that even though, um, right, he died to sin, and he did that because he gave his life to God and to become the servant of Jesus. He he still had to fight, and it was a big battle. But I have good news here. The good news is that as we put our old man and all the imperfections, all the failures, everything that is part of being who we are, when we put that to death, we replace with something new. So like Paul, we know that most of those individuals that were beneficiaries, they benefited from Jesus' teachings and they were healed, they pressed on only by personal choice, right? Many, if not most, received this second chance, if you will, and yet they did not leverage or optimize their lives into after that. They actually were ungrateful, and many fell back to the old ways of working, the old ways of living, and that exactly fell back to what made them weak in the first place. And some others, because truth hurts, right? Unconsciously or inadvertently accused him. But what we know, and Joanna reminds us that regardless what bucket you would be if you were living in that time, what bucket we would fall, no exception, no one was immune to his immense magnetism, his power to do that. So let's think in terms of, and I bring that to you, right? In the slide, a revolutionary par excellence. He turned the struggle inside out. The death of the old man and the birth of the old man is what we're talking here. Jesus offered a first step and, right, the second chance, but it was up to us as his students of life to go on and take that gift and move on and proceed. And it's very interesting, as I talked to you last week on the chapter about responsibility, that it's up to us, right? It's up to us to take on our accountability and responsibility and move on and press on, right? Because the new path was already paved for us. And if you think about it, right? If you really want to be healed and create a life of wellness, wellness and not being ill or sick, whatever that is hurting us, our sense of balance or peace, we must allow to be scrutinized by this amazing psychotherapist that is Jesus. And as we open up ourselves to Him, let us listen and follow His instructions. And so the notion here, the invitation here by Joanna de Angelis is let's revolutionize ourselves. Let us break free from any time that we fall prey to self-indulgence or self-punishment or self-pity in anything that made us uncomfortable with our own past. And if you, like me, want to win, let's get on the battlefield. Let us fight and let us be open to love. And love will be there for us. So let's never forget we're not alone in this battle. And with that, I would say I hope this discussion today can inspire you to begin each day with love, with courage. And I will see you next week when we talk about possessions. Thank you so very much and have a wonderful week.